Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. Today you join us for another exciting episode as we're going to sort of delve again into the realm of philosophy, and in particular, epistemology.
So, for those of you who don't know, epistemology is the area in philosophy that deals with knowledge. It is the study of knowledge. And some of the sort of common questions are, what is knowledge? Can you ever be sure, absolutely sure of something? And the way we get information, the way we can confirm that information. So, it's quite a broad, but as well, very interesting and contentious topic among the fans of philosophy. So, the first question, John, I reckon, is what is knowledge?
Yeah. So I think the concept of knowledge is something that at first sight is fairly difficult to sort of define, in the sense that what is knowledge? It's this sort of all-encompassing thing that all humans have. It's a characteristic of human existence, which I would sort of dilute to an understanding of something. I believe knowledge can be factual, but also that it can be perhaps spiritual, one kind of spiritual knowledge, which isn't based on scientific facts. Or one can have knowledge that's based off reason. So I think of knowledge as this sort of all-encompassing thing, purely based on this idea of it's a human understanding of a concept. Now that's slightly contentious.
I do think that is quite
Many
contentious.
many philosophers will camp knowledge into the reason park or into the experience park. But I think I've sort of got a slightly more holistic perspective on it. This perhaps isn't the most philosophically sound, but I do think for me, it's just this idea of an understanding. What do you think knowledge is, Diane?
Yeah, so I'm more of a sort of traditionalist
Yeah.
when it comes to epistemology and many other philosophical topics, but mainly epistemology. I think knowledge is sort of absolute truth. I don't think you can say truly have knowledge. I think there's the difference between understanding and knowledge, because you can understand something and not be right.
Yeah.
Because, in your mind, you say a scientific concept like quantum mechanics. You can say understand quantum mechanics. In your perspective, you do. But if a professor were to question you on it, you would not get anything right.
Yeah.
You would understand, but you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't have the knowledge of it. I classify knowledge as sort of absolute truth, as when you're sure of something being the case. And here I am a rationalist. I don't think you can come to that conclusion any other way apart from through reason. I think it's, the experience sort of pathway for me has got a major flaw, which is why does the fact that something happened in the past necessarily mean that it's going to happen in the future? The fact that you drank water 50 times before, for me, without thinking, is not enough for me to guarantee that if the 51st time I drink water, I'll be fine.
Oh yeah.
I don't think you can make that sort of bulletproof argument in that sphere. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think reason really is fundamental to it. And for our listeners who don't know, the two perhaps sort of most dominant theories in epistemology are rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism emphasizes reason as the primary source of knowledge. So it's logical thinking, this sort of rationalistic approach. It's using the mind to sort of tackle what knowledge is and a concept. On the other side, you have empiricism, which lends its name to the concept of empirical evidence. And that's understanding things through our senses, i.e., through experience. So it's seeing something. And this is associated with scholars such as Locke or David Hume or, a variety of philosophers, but Hume in particular. He and Mill, they're very big on using empiricism in lots of their major philosophical arguments. Concerning whether I'm more of an empiricist or rationalist, I think I always find it hard to say on this, because I think there is an empirical reality to so many things. such as science, it's based upon reason, but something can only ever be proved in many ways, I find, if it is empirical, because empirical provides 100% certainty of something. But I think you can reason, you can use rationalism to ascertain that something is very highly possible. But until I personally 100%, I will only say that's true knowledge. And I think you can only say something 100% is 100% true or 100% real if you
Well,
see it. Such
I
as, if I see God, there are rationalistic arguments for God's existence. But if I experience God, I'm 100% sure without doubt can say, yes, that's a truth, that's knowledge. What do you think about that, Diane?
I highly disagree with that, because my view is the complete opposite. I think you can never prove something empirically. I think the empirical will tell you something, but that is not enough. You need your reason, your logic, and your mind to be able to sort of digest what an experiment tells you, and then come up with a better formulation. And that's, if you do an experiment, the chance of you getting it wrong due to your human error is there. It exists, and if you wouldn't remove an anomalous result, then that skews your entire sort of operation, you would say. So I think it's the other way around. I think empirical evidence tells us the basics, but without reason we can't truly get to a state of knowledge. Famous rationalists, I mean, the most famous one's probably Rene Descartes, really.
Oh, yeah.
He was the OG rationalist. And he had a very good example, actually. And that was sort of you being tricked visually, which is something that happens, if you've got sort of
Yeah.
like reflection indexes or like oases in the desert when you're really thirsty and dehydrated. Descartes' main point things, you think you've seen the oasis, or you think that if you put a pen in water, it's slightly bent. But unless you use your reason and your mind to sort of digest the information and realize that it's not true, you've gone to the wrong conclusion. So you've got an understanding, but you don't have knowledge.
Yeah. I see. I definitely see where you're coming from there, and I mean that's a very famous example is the floating ship of that sort of famous vid picture that was distributed of this optical illusion of a ship looking like it was floating in the sky, but obviously ships don't float in the sky. It was an optical illusion. But I still find that, for example, the society we live in is highly empiricist. Things like courts of law, they're obviously function wholly around the idea of empiricism above reason, even if there's a high probability that you committed a crime and everyone, including the judge, knows that you committed, without evidence they will never convict you, because, sort of going back to my point, evidence can deceive you. There can be anomalies, but I think with empirical testing, and especially thorough, varied empirical testing, you can provide an absolute certainty to something. But I think it's I don't think it should be as binary as saying empiricism or rationalism is not suitable, because I do think there's a place for both. And I think, rationalism is essential, and you can see it with science. To achieve something scientifically, you almost need rationalism and empiricism. It needs to make logical sense and also evidence driven sense. So I don't know if it's, so I don't really entirely think it's as much of a sort of a binary question as it is.
Yeah,
Perhaps. Yeah.
I think I'm more. I understand your point. I think it's an
Yeah.
important one, but again, for me, I'm quite a sort of hardline
Yeah.
rationalist. For the reasons I mentioned previously, sort of experiences deceiving you and not being able to get to that point of true knowledge, of true wisdom, of true fact, and
Yeah.
of a fact that is without a doubt true and real, empirically. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
I think empiricism is very important in the process. I think it's sort of the stepping stone in
Yeah.
that you gather the evidence. But even in a court of law, you can have all the evidence in the world. If it doesn't make sense, together, pieced together, you're never going to get convicted.
Yeah. It is almost a combination, as I said. You sort of got to, yeah.
It's just about what the
Yeah.
first step is and what the sort of final step is. And I view the first step as being empiricism and the sort of final level as rationalism, as the sort of top and only way to actually get there. And I think maybe you see it
Yes,
switched around.
the inverse. Another theory, which is perhaps the third most dominant idea in epistemology, an idea which is particularly sort of applied in a biblical context when studying divine texts, is this idea of skepticism.
Yes.
Which, for our listeners who don't know, that sort of doubts whether reliable, complete knowledge is ever possible. It's, as the name suggests, being a bit of a skeptic.
Yes.
So, Dan, what are your views on this? Are you a skeptic or not?
Well, I mean, I've dabbled in skepticism, I have to say, but no. If I were to classify myself, I classify myself as a rationalist. I see skepticism, I understand why it's there, but almost to sort of be a bit ironic, I think empirically, skepticism can be disproven because there are some things that are simply fact.
Yeah.
Such as, I mean, the famous one is I think, therefore I am. So René Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, is probably the best sort of example of rationalism beating skepticism, is because you're a thinking being, because you think you exist, and because you sort of are aware of your own body. Through rationalism, you can come to the conclusion that you, in fact, exist. You might not be sure of anyone. I'm not sure you exist truly. You know, it might be a robot, might be a video game character. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I exist. I know that I am not a video game character. I know that not. So if I know that I exist, I think that is a true piece of information. Sort of scientifically, I think you can also beat skepticism. But if we're good, 2 plus 2 is always going to be 4. That is true knowledge. That is a fact beyond dispute. You can't do an equation that is 2 plus 2 and you get any other result apart from 4. You can't do that. It doesn't work. But yeah, skepticism at some level I think is useful. Being a bit skeptic and a bit not easily persuaded to suddenly subscribe to something or believe something or take something as fact without employing your rational mind and your own thinking power, I think, is a good trait. But being a skeptic, the sort of philosophical sense of the word, I don't subscribe to.
Yeah, me too. I actually find skepticism quite cynical in a way.
Yeah.
And it's because this idea that true knowledge can never exist, it's just sort of, as you said, baseless. There's not really any grounding to it. And one of the main sort of arguments used by skeptics is infinite regression, which, for if you don't know, is this idea of this continual chain of causes. So a skeptic would say that a justification always leads to another justification. So we are humans because we breathe. Why is that? Because we have organs. Why is that? And it's just this continual chain that goes on forever.
Well, yeah,
However,
but I mean,
William Lane Craig is the notable
#1 guy.
mathematician who has disproved it.
Yeah.
But there are so many others who said that this idea of an infinite chain of events or infinite chain of events that goes around for the entire universe, that does not exist. I forgot how to do it, but there's a very simple mathematical sort of phrase and sentence which easily gets rid of the problem. And in reality, most things in the world have a finite past, have a finite cause. Humans breathe because why? Because that's just the way we're born, isn't it?
I mean, I think, what is 2 plus 2?
4.
Why?
2, yeah.
Therefore,
4, yeah.
I mean,
It's a
can't really
simple
argue with that. Can't really say why to that. So, no, I think infinite regression, it just doesn't work. I mean, mathematically it doesn't work. Logically, it doesn't really work.
Right.
I think where they're coming from, though, I see where they're coming from.
Yeah.
It's an interesting and a sort of good angle to take. That is sort of, if we look at the big sort of macro sphere, then yeah, okay, why do we exist?
Yeah.
And you sort of go into that, then you might get to an infinite regression, but with most questions, you're never going to be put in the position of having to sort of ask why
Yeah.
more than 5 or 6 or 7 times or 8 times. I mean,
Yeah. There's underlying all, there's eventually an answer.
Indeed.
So we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. We've just had a quick sort of dive into epistemology, which, as we've mentioned throughout, is the study of knowledge. What we know, what we don't know, and how we know it. Whether that's rationalism, something that Diane's a very big fan of, empiricism, or in fact, if one is a skeptic and doesn't believe they know anything at all. So we hope you've enjoyed listening. Please do rate the podcast 5 stars, follow us on social media, and show us any support you can.
See you next week.
See you then.